am going to do some more work on this deer, but before I do that, you can see I have nothing here. I really have to put a few things over here, and I do have things in mind. Let's get started. I do have another headache today, but it's not a migraine. And unfortunately, my life is centered around headaches. So let's get those trees in. They are very light in color. Doing this with a liner brush and a very, very light touch. Now you see me putting in leaves that suggest the trees that are closer to the deer. So I already have the background in, the part that makes your eye look all the way in the back. But now I just want to add dimension by placing these leaves that are closer, the trees that are closer to the deer. I'm adjusting the color here to bring out the deer. Also known as painting the negative areas to bring out the positive areas, positive being the deer. And here you see me doing the same technique for the tree. And because the deer's back is lighter, I'm including a darker tree just behind her to bring that out. And I really don't like the spottiness of this tree, so I'm going to blend more around the tree. The light during this time of the day, which was between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning, is about halfway up. That means the sun itself has not risen to the very top. The very top would be 12 noon. This tree, probably the brightest area would be halfway up the tree. You can see I'm doing it with the other trees too, putting in more of a highlight about halfway down the tree. And here I'm placing highlights and brushwork to bring out the trees on the left side. Now it's time to correct the coloring and the way the light is hitting this particular deer. And I'm going to also include some adjustments in the other two deer. The middle deer is a little bit rough, so we're going to smooth her out. I don't want to lose my bone structure here and the sense of muscles that this deer has. And I'll think that way for all three deer, actually. Before I moved to Alabama, I spent 25 years on a wooded property in New York. Of course, we took out trees that we needed to put up the house, but we did not clear cut anything, and we had 4 acres. So it was almost a daily occurrence to see deer. Notice the size of my brush. It is not a tiny brush. It is a flat, and I believe it's a number 5 flat. And so the first question to your mind is probably, well, how is it that you can use that big brush? Well, I'm not using the entire brush when I'm making a stroke. I might be using just the very tip of the brush. But I find that using a bigger brush like that and getting familiar with it to say, okay, I don't have to do straight up and down with the brush, but use the brush in different angles is the best way to get brushwork that is notable on your artwork. Now, here I'm finally getting around to adjusting the color of all 3 deer to make them match a little bit more, even though on the source, the deer farthest to the right, or the one the closest to the viewer, is definitely a muley. What do I mean by muley? She's gray, and these other ones are not. But in order to have this composition get along, I'm going to adjust her to be more golden than gray. So the almost daily occurrence of seeing deer allowed me to a little bit now study the anatomy. It's very important for an artist to understand the bone structure, the muscles, how a deer stands, in order to paint it convincingly. It doesn't mean you can't use artist license, though. Note that for this belly, which would normally be white, I'm not painting it white. I'm just painting it a lighter shade of her body color. Now there's also some branch work in through here that's gonna, I would say, pretty much tie everything together. So I'm checking the value through here, and it's lighter than it is right now. So I have to adjust that. And I compared the value to the value of the deer. Once the deer are adjusted, I now have to adjust the value on the ground because the sunlight is hitting it and it is slightly lighter than the value of the deer. And as you go through your journey painting, you will begin to always check values, and it's relational. So when you adjust a value in one area, you have to check that value with the rest in your source. So you're always adjusting, not only bringing up the detail, but adjusting the values. So what I'm doing now is to benefit the composition. Those leaves are the direction that will point to the deer. So we read from left to right. So we want to have something on the left side that directs your eye to what you want it to see. And in my case, it's these three deer. It's subtle, but it works. I am going to cool down the green by this major deer here because I want there to be a contrast. I don't want everything to be warm. There has to be some cooler colors in the composition. And speaking of composition, here is another tip. There is a piece of the road showing in the photo source, and I'm going to include it. Why? Because it kind of assists the eye into jumping right to the deer. It is a spot on the lower right side where you would normally look out if you're reading a book. So you want to keep that in mind at all times. So I have something to block the eye from leaving the composition. The goal is to have people who look at the painting want to keep looking at the painting. That's the goal. And we do these little compositional tricks to keep them in the painting. They don't know what we're doing, but that's why we do these things. And another compositional rule, and you see me putting in the warmer colors on the ground is closest to the viewer. Anything that is closest to the viewer is always warmer than something that's further away. And that is because of atmospheric perspective. And if you look at the deer that are behind the first deer on the right, you might notice that they're a little on the cooler side. That's because I put green into their mixtures to cool it down. You might remember me saying that there was some branch work that was in front of the deer by the roadside, and I'm beginning to indicate that now. Although they're not in the source, I decided another compositional trick that would work here is to put some logs, fallen logs, that are pointing directly to the deer. Shortly, I'm going to put some lighter branches in front of the deer all the way to the left. She is coming up the hill, and I want her to look like she's behind something. To add to the wilderness, I'm going to add some rocks here. I start by laying in a base color, blocking the rocks in. And now we're going to develop the rock by adding some lighter tones. We want to keep the edges that are sharp, looking sharp. So we won't round too many of these edges. The rounded part of any edge would be if there's like a lot of wind or rain that falls on a rock, then it might become more rounded. But generally, they're pretty much sharp edges. Let's ground these rocks by putting in their cast shadows. And of course, the deer would cast a shadow, so let's give them their shadows. And cast shadows are not generally as dark as you think they are, although in photographs they are dark. Remember, we need a warmer grass color the closer we get to the viewer. Laying this color in rather thickly to prepare to draw it up for tall grass. And at the same time, trying to be aware of the lay of the land. What do I mean by lay of the land? How the land is. Is it going up? Is it going down? That's what you have to keep in mind and have your brushwork indicate the lay of the land. You probably can see that I'm using some of the color that I just laid down to draw up the grass with. And then there's other times when I'm going into the palette for even lighter color and adding that on. If you wanted to learn this technique, what I would suggest is that you get some oil painting paper and that you would just practice this by laying down color and then drawing it up. And do that over and over again until you become quite familiar with it. It's better to practice on this oil paper any technique that you want to learn until you feel like you got a grasp on it before you start putting these techniques into painting or practice. And one of my last techniques that I like to use, not in every painting, but something as complicated as this, I want to do something called splattering. So I'm putting on my rubber glove. I'm going to mix up some dark color. And I have a brush that I use only for splattering. And I'm going to use my finger and draw it against the edge of the brush, which will cause it to throw out little dots of color or splatters. Now, why do I do this? It has a unifying effect. I don't understand why. All I know is that it works. The little dots of color all throughout the painting just unify it. Just make sure you have a rubber glove on. Now comes the best part, the signature. Thank you for watching. I am so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Please, please consider subscribing.